Welcome to Back in the Groove. If you're new here, my name's Keith, and I'm getting back into vinyl after having my collection in storage for more than 25 years. Now, over the years, I've amassed a pretty significant collection of music across multiple genres and subgenres, but I've been thinking a little bit about what were the gateway albums to specific genres or subgenres for me. And so in this video, I'm going to share 12 key gateway albums that opened up another area of music and expanded my musical repertoire, my listening habits, and just opened up a new area of music that was interesting to me. I'm going to start the journey with Queen and the amazing album A Night at the Opera. Now, before I get into all of these, I just want to say that these are not necessarily, and in fact, are certainly not my 12 favorite albums. They're just albums that struck a chord with me at a point in time and expanded my understanding of music and interest in music. So this particular one I bought from my mother's Kay's catalogue back in the day in the UK. A Kay's catalogue was a thick publication that sold just about everything in there. You would send off your order, and then a week later or whatever, it would arrive at your house. And that included everything from washing machines to kids' bikes to records, etc. And I bought this on the back of Bohemian Rhapsody, which was out in around 1976, 77. And I was about 13 at the time and loved Bohemian Rhapsody. And that drove me to pick this up. And what an amazing album I thought this was, at least at the time. There was stuff on here that I'd not heard before, from the rock of Death on Two Legs to the Seaside Rendezvous and those sort of mouthed brass bands that Queen did, the acoustics of 39. The Prophets song was great, of course, Bohemian Rhapsody itself. And it was just a great album. I'm in love with My Car as another great one. And of course, what you got with this was a number of different singers, a number of different styles within the album itself, as well as Freddie singing. We've got Brian May, we've got Roger Taylor singing on the album as well. And that just, really opened up the start of a kind of a rock journey. But around that time, of course, was the emergence of new wave started to come in the late 70s. Punk, new wave, whatever you want to call that, drove me to pick up this. This is Elvis Costello, and this is this year's model, of course. And this was something that I picked up around the same time as getting things like Ian Dury's New Boots and Panties. There was the Sex Pistols, Never Mind the Bollocks around the same time. Devo, I think, was another one. So around this era, I was really getting interested in that kind of music. I know in the charts we'd had leading up to this things like the Boomtown Rats, the Jam, and there was a real excitement around that period of time. And this album just sounded like nothing I'd heard before. We've got on here, things like Pump It Up, with that raw sort of energy, those thumping drums at the start of it. Hand in Hand, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea was the single, of course. So there's that whole sort of myriad of keyboards or some organ in there. And Elvis's voice was, completely different as well, kind of quirky. The guitars were very. I remember thinking at the time how sort of thin sounding the guitars were. They were quite jangly, tinny almost, but it was such a different sound, and absolutely loved this particular album. And if I'm honest, I'm an Elvis Costello fan to this very day, even though his style has changed time and time again over the years. I thought that was a great album that exposed so much for me. Um, but while I was listening to all of that, I remember going on holiday to a little town not too far from me. I think it was a summer break or something. We went to Knaresborough in Yorkshire and did a bit of fishing there. And I remember going into a record store. Must have only been about 14 or so, and remember seeing this album in the record store, and I had like I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. If we, I picked this up, I'm thumbing through it. I imagine at the time it was kind of sealed or whatever, and seeing Gene Simmons like this with the blood dripping down his chin, etc., was just conjuring up all sorts of images. I had no idea what the music was like, of course, and I was really intrigued by it. But I left the shop, didn't buy it, went home that week, and it was just on my mind all week about this album. And at the weekend after we got home, I remember taking my pocket money and going off to Smith's in Middlesbrough, and was able to pick this up and got it home and put it on, and I loved it. Absolutely loved everything about it, from the rock of Detroit Rock City, Love Gun. These were the first times I was hearing these songs, so you got Shock Me, and then you've got the Ballad of Beth, of course. And I think it was probably the first time I'd ever heard a drum solo on this album with Peter Criss. And I know we all know now that Peter Criss is probably not the best drummer in the world, but I loved that drum solo. And I remember sitting in my bedroom, and I'd have boxes out and a pair of drumsticks, and I'd be beating away at the cardboard boxes and things. And this just opened up that whole world of not just heavy rock, etc., in that way, but also the sort of the theatrical aspect of it. And I think it was the love of this that made me lean later on towards people like Alice Cooper at the time, Wasp later on with their look, even the Tubes. If you think about Elvis Costello at the time, you could put the Tubes in with that sort of punk new wave era, but equally they're theatrical in a similar way to Kiss, and then later on, kind of Manowar. Those kind of things probably partly came from the theatrics of the love of Kiss. Um, Now, I probably would have been playing this album to friends at school. We used to hang out in a music room every lunchtime, and were able to play records on a lunch break. We were all at the time involved in doing musicals and things with the school. It sounds a bit weird now, but we'd all play albums in the music room over lunch, and somebody introduced me to this. Of course, this is Black Sabbath's debut, which came out sometime before Kiss, but this was around the period that I would have discovered it. I'd say around 77, something like that. And of course, we all know what this is like now, but you know, from the opening of the atmospherics of the start of Black Sabbath, etc., and those opening guitar tones of Tony Iommi's was just absolutely incredible. and I was hooked on Black Sabbath. Such a great album and a gateway for so many of us, I'm sure, into heavy metal. I guess Kiss had lit the fire in me with the heavier side of things, but this just took it to a whole other level. And this I guess is really the start of much of what I loved about heavy rock music, heavy metal music, whatever we want to call it. People in my generation often, interchangeably use hard rock, heavy metal, interchangeably for many of the same bands. But that, an incredible gateway. Now, at the same time, we were sharing albums at school, as I said, and Sabbath were there, Deep Purple were there, Rush. I remember hearing Farewell to Kings around that time. So I was, beginning to be exposed to things, but something completely different was introduced to me, which was this. This is Genesis selling England by the pound. And I'm including this as a gateway really to progressive rock because so far I'd built up an understanding of the hard rock of Kiss, the heavy metal of Black Sabbath. On the back of that, as I've said, Deep Purple and other hard rock, classic rock bands. But I never heard anything quite like this, and how different it was, how mellow in parts, how progressive it was. And it was an absolutely outstanding album from start to finish. I've said many times that my favorite on this, of course, is the Battle of Epping Forest. But even things like Firth of Fifth, More Fool Me, the a real such a ballad, and Dancing with the Moonlit Night. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. I didn't really get a lot of the lyrics, if I'm honest, at that time. But there's something about the music, the space it sort of created, the way it just wove these different passages of music together really opened me up to progressive rock. And so that was my gateway, I think, at the time. For Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery would have been something that I'd have picked up around then. Rick Wakeman's Journey to the Center of the Earth, the myths and legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, etc. And I think it's really because of Genesis that I still love that progressive rock element that's visible today in more modern bands, things like Spock's Beard, Transatlantic, etc. That was really the gateway for me into that era. But then, of course, at the end of the 70s and going into 80, we got the new wave of British heavy metal. And of course, at that time, nobody could escape this incredible album of Iron Maiden's. Like many, I'd heard the first two tracks of Maiden on the Metal for Mothers album, and was just totally blown away by Iron Maiden in particular, and picked this up. I was able to see Iron Maiden, I think, after the Killers album in Middlesbrough Town Hall. And, this was just a shock to so many of us. I already liked the hard rock side of things, obviously, with Kiss, with Sabbath, etc. But this was something different. This was something much more raw, but it still had those progressive elements to it. It still had the Phantom of the Opera, Remember Tomorrow, Transylvania with the time changes, etc. And this opened up lots of bands of that era, the new wave of British heavy metal, all of the typical bands, your Saxon, Samson, Limelight's a big favorite of mine from this era, even though I don't consider them really new wave of British heavy metal. But it just opened me up to so many bands around that time, and all of that at the same time. I was still picking up lots of the hard rock stuff, the classic rock stuff, but that's just expanded things somewhat. Now, I think I probably went along for probably a couple of years with nothing too significant in terms of change, um, until I one day, for whatever reason, picked this album up. I'd heard a lot about Frank Zappa. I'd never heard anything by Frank Zappa, and I just got intrigued with this and picked it up on a whim. And this is One Size Fits All, which I think is a great introduction for anybody who wants to try out Frank Zappa. And I was just amazed by the sound of it. Again, it's got a lot of progressive elements, but so different. Things like Inca Roads and that kind of, what is it? Is it a marimba or something, or a glockenspiel? I'm never sure what the correct terms are for those. But you've got Ruth Underwood playing all of that stuff amazingly. We've got George Duke on here, I think, playing keyboards. But this also introduced me to more sort of humor within music, a little bit jazzy as well, I think. So it expanded things for me in that way. Maybe a little bit avant-garde as well. And on the back of this, I dipped my toe into lots more Zappa. In fact, Zappa is to blame for me um, selling, or not selling, but trading in a lot of my early collectible items, a lot of Maiden stuff, a lot of Kiss stuff that I had, all kinds of different pressings and colored vinyls and all sorts of things. And I remember trading them in so that I could go and buy Zappa's discography, basically. And I took them all into a store, got a few £100 in credit, and I spent a load of money on Zappa stuff and really binged him for a long time, which exposed me to lots of different styles within Zappa's own repertoire. Then things started to change quite significantly through the 80s. We had the hair metal and all of that on the back of the traditional hard rock of that started for me right back at Kiss in a way. But as we all know, things changed with the introduction of grunge and Nirvana, Alice in Chains. It was for me with Facelift and things like Man in the Box. This was just such a different sound, wasn't it? And I'm not the biggest lover of grunge these days, but at the time I got carried away, like many others, in the introduction of grunge, and so got into a lot of bands like Alice in Chains, Faith No More, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, etc. So that really opened things up for me a little more through Alice in Chains. So I definitely would consider this something of a gateway, and I think that would lead on to other bands further down the line, like My Chemical Romance and things like that, that are much more in the kind of emo thing. But I think without grunge, you don't get emo and all of that kind of stuff, and Bullet from a Valentine and those kind of bands. But shortly after that, I don't know how short it was. I think this would be mid 90s. I would have still been watching MTV a lot at that time. I think that's where a lot of the changes came from. You'll remember MTV had lots of the grunge stuff on. But at the time, it was also playing some things by this band, Dream Theater. And this was like a breath of fresh air. It was just so different, so progressive in many ways, but really blending all of those kind of heavy rock influences with the progressive side of things. So you got things like Pull Me Under was incredible. You got Surrounded, which was a lovely, ballady kind of thing. Under a Glass Moon, Waiting for Sleep, Learning to Live was on my top 10 recently for songs that are over 10 minutes. It's just a stellar album. And this, to me, is an example of probably a perfect album. This is still a big favorite album of mine. Now, why do I say this is a gateway album though? This is because it led me into all of the progressive metal side of things. So on the back of these, I remember going to see Dream Theater in London at the Forum, and they were supported by Vanden Pla. And Vanden Pla are one of my favorite bands now to this day. They were incredible support band to Dream Theater. Vanden Pla, Pain of Salvation, Enchant, all on the back of Dream Theater, and lots of other less well-known bands as well. Bands like Ark with Jorn Landin did two amazing prog metal albums, but tons of stuff, and that probably leans even into today, into things even like Polyphia and bands like that, who are, although nothing like Dream Theater, I think, this is the gateway to those other bands that come later as well, and all of that gent sort of style that's popular today with bands like Polyphia and Pliny and Chon and those kind of bands. So Dream Theater is a massive gateway for me. Now, I think around this time I probably had a bit of a break, or was burnt out from music a little bit. Maybe it was the end of MTV. I'm not sure completely. Maybe it was just, raising a family, etc. But a lot of music seemed to go off the radar for me. Until I came across this album by Harum Scarum, which is Mood Swings. And the reason I've included this is because it was this kind of time frame where I suddenly became aware of all of these other bands that were kind of bubbling under the surface, almost like an underground of music that I wasn't aware of. And so I started to pick up other magazines and things that I hadn't seen, like Hard Rocks, and I'd hear from bands like Poker Face. This also had some prog metal in here as well, so you got lots of other things like Stradivarius and bands like this. But things like Jean Beauvoir, Crown of Thorns, Ten, and lots of Scandinavian AOR bands, Talisman, Jeff Scott Soto, and all of the bands that he would be in, I'd pick up through various other magazines. Here we've got Rock Report, bands like Storyteller, Higher Ground, Bjorn Land, of course, another magazine, Sound Barrier, had lots of stuff in, and Frontiers magazine as well. And so I became aware of this, what felt like an underground of music, and I started getting into many of those bands and picking those things up. ended up going to the Gods concert once, which is a fantastic show with Harem Scarum and Jeff Scott Soto, Honeymoon Suite. I think Eric Martin's band was on there, and that was absolutely incredible period. And so I went along that path for many years, but after a period of time, we moved. I had all my vinyl in storage. Later, I'd stopped buying CDs and had moved to more of a sort of streaming environment. So I was just continuing to stream a lot of the content that I'd acquired over the years. But a few years ago, I was kind of nudged in another direction by my sons. For those of you who don't know, I've got three grown sons, all married with their own families, all in their mid to late 30s. But they had discovered country music, and I'd poo pooed it for a long time until I came across Luke Combs. And I listened to one of his albums. I don't actually have the physical album to show you, but that was a gateway for me into the world of country music. Now, if you'd have said to me, a number of years ago that I would like country music, I would have actually, just laughed at you, because country to me was old style country, and western was Kenny Rogers, was Tammy Wynette, was all of those kind of artists. But modern country is really nothing like that. And the introduction to Luke Combs and his album was just breathtaking. There were some amazing tracks on there, like When It Rains, It Pours, Be a Can, and other classics on the album. And in listening to him, that really got me into more country. So I started to listen to other contemporaries of his, Cody Johnson, Riley Green, Blake Shelton, Jason Aldean, Chris Jansen. And the funny thing with country artists that I still find odd is they're all like just people's names. They're all an individual largely. So they you miss the band names of your Iron Maidens and your Manowars and things like that. And it gets a bit weird when you're just seeing John so and so and Chris this and whoever. But country music is something that I've been into for a few years now. Managed to see Luke Combs last year at was it last year, a couple of years back at Country to Country, and still listen to lots of country stuff to this day. So that was another area that really opened up this whole area of music that I'd just not been exposed to, and I absolutely loved it, I must say. And I find it so easy to put some country stuff on when I'm in the car with other people, things like that. It's brilliant, and some of it is so rocky. I've got to say, especially people like Jason Aldean is almost a cross between sort of classic rock and and country. And if you've not heard, if you're into your sort of hard rock, then listen to "We Back" by Jason Aldean. It's a absolutely fantastic rock track, and great stuff. Now, the next one, and the last album for me is somebody else that you've heard me mention recently, and that is Gregory Porter. And this is Liquid Spirit by Gregory Porter. Now, I first heard Gregory Porter. Well, I think I'd heard him, a couple of times, but the thing that triggered this for me was Jules Holland's show one New Year about 3 or 4 years back, and he played a song on there called Mr. Holland, which I thought was brilliant. His voice was incredible, and I'm a real sucker for sort of good singers, and I just thought he was brilliant. And on the back of that, I picked up Liquid Spirit, and this is just an amazing album, which has become a bit of a gateway into jazz, traditional jazz, contemporary male vocal jazz, but also it's made me sort of search out other things like Art Blakey, Nora Jones, Dave Brubeck Quartet, and other sort of jazz artists, and I'll sometimes put them on in the background and really enjoy that bit of jazz as well. Now, I'm not saying that this is the first introduction to jazz. I said earlier that I think there's elements of jazz in Zappa. Along the way through my musical journey, there'll be some fusion in there. There's some some instrumental guitar stuff that I've come across that can be quite jazzy as well. But it was this that really opened me up to the world of jazz. And so I hope in showing you those albums, it gives you maybe some understanding of the breadth or narrowness, depending on your view of what I've shown, in terms of what I'm largely interested in, what's driven me so far. I always stay open to other styles of music, and do try and keep moving forward with new bands, and try and get exposure to those. And I don't want to stay stuck in a rut of 1977 and only like the music from back then. I don't think it's good for us, really. We need to keep learning and being exposed to new things. So that was my 12 gateway albums. So what do you think of those, and what would you have chosen differently? Leave your comments below with the albums that you think were gateways to certain genres or subgenres within the area that you're collecting in. And if you did enjoy the video, please do give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. But until the next video, bye for now.